Hello, everybody. This is Alan from Alan Talks FinTech. Today, I want to talk to you about how much money do you really need to retire. First, a few caveats. There are multiple ways to do these calculations and try to figure out how much you really need. No one way is correct. And the whole idea of this presentation is get you thinking about it, start doing your own calculations. Hopefully, each time you calculate it or use a calculator, they'll come out roughly the same, but there could be some differences. So, a few approaches we're going to take a look at. So, one is kind of what a lot of these online calculators do. They basically ask you for your income, and then based on that income, they figure about how much you need to spend each year in retirement. Another way is you actually kind of look at your own spend and then create your own little spreadsheet looking at the income coming in and your investments and then see if you got enough. Another method is the so-called 4% safe withdrawal rate. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then recently, Susie Orman was on one of the audio podcasts and talked about you really need $5 to $10 million to retire early. But, some of what she said we should probably pay attention to a little bit. So let's start out with a few numbers. Average household spend is around $58,000 a year prior to retirement age 65. Once they get into retirement, it starts to go down a little bit, and the older you get, the spend tends to go down. However, as you get older, your medical costs tend to go up, and there was one estimate of needing $285,000 for a couple 65 and older, and then another estimate of people spend about $5,000 or $6,000 a year per person for normal medical costs. And then the last thing you got to kind of watch out for is if you end up in a nursing home or assisted living, you could end up spending anywhere from $20,000 a year to up to $100,000 a year. And most people are in a nursing home up to 3 years before they pass away. And then the other thing to think about, your spend's going to go up every year due to inflation. In my calculations, I kind of figure about 3%. And then you'll get a return on investment on your investment and savings. So if you have in the stock market S&P 500, you should get at least 7% on average. Now, if you have it in bonds, it's more like 2, 3, 4%. You need to kind of take all of these factors into account. So when you go into a lot of websites, a lot of people don't really know what their spend is, but people generally know what their income is. So a lot of these calculators take your income and your expected increase each year, and then your age, and maybe a few other factors, and try to figure out if you have enough money or how much money you'll need to spend in your lifetime. A lot of it's kind of hidden behind the scenes, but they do a fairly good job. Not 100% accurate, but they do okay. Now, one of them at Fidelity, they seem to kind of take 80% of your current income, kind of as that's their starting point, and they may decrease that percentage down as your income goes up. So in other words, if you make $50,000 a year, they may take 80% of that, say, okay, when you retire, you need 40%. But if you're making $200,000 a year, they figure, well, maybe you really only need somewhere around 55 to 65% of that money in retirement. So I'm going to use $70,000 as an example here. So suppose you stop working at age 60, say you live up to age 85, then if you just take 70,000 times 25, you end up with $1,750,000 of money that you'll have to spend. Now, if you're getting Social Security, suppose you're getting $24,000 a year, starting at age 62, then you'd probably receive about $550,000 over those years, and so you'd have to make up about 1.2 million in the difference. Over a period of 20 years or 25 years, you should be able to at least double your money in your investment. So yeah, you may end up spending 1.2 million, but if you had 600,000 and you doubled your money, it should sustain you. Let's take another approach where we actually look at our spend and then also look at our income, calculate the difference, and then see how much we need to take from our investments. For my spend, just a little background on me. I paid off my mortgage a couple years ago. So in 2017, I had my mortgage paid off. Kids are all gone. I have no college loans. And then recently I bought a vehicle, so I'm spending about $500 a month on a car loan. But basically that's really my only debt at this point. I've gone back and I've looked at my spending on a monthly basis and come up with these rough numbers on my spend. So basically $12,000 a year on utilities, that car loan, some life insurance that I have, and then about $18,000 a year on food, gas for the vehicles, any auto repairs, and then dining out. Another $10,000 on property tax, property insurance, car insurance. One of my bigger items, we spend about $20,000 a year on travel or other discretionary spending. So if you add all that up, it's about $60,000. Figure if you stop working, you gotta go buy medical insurance and pay for health costs. I know if I got health insurance through my work, it'd cost me over $20,000 a year. And suppose, I have to pay some out of pocket. So I figure I'm spending $25,000 a year on medical for insurance and healthcare costs. And then probably $15,000 a year on income taxes. So if you add all that up, it's $100,000 a year. You look back at some of those expenses, I could easily cut out $20,000 for that discretionary spending. I can reduce my medical costs when I get to age 65 using Medicare. So I figured with my estimate, I'm probably going to spend about $70,000 a year. Okay, let's look at a little spreadsheet that I put together. So suppose in the columns we put each year, and on this one I started at age 62, and suppose we go out until age, I'm going to pick 85. Most people in my family don't live beyond the age of about 82, so suppose I live out age 85 in this example. So let's suppose we do that. We have a column per year, and then suppose our income is Social Security. So just a rough guess, $24,000 a year, age 62. Suppose I start taking Social Security then, and I get a 2% cost of living adjustment every year. What would that be? So I did that for every year going out. On the spend, when I was talking about $70,000 a year, that was at the age of 58. So suppose I don't retire till 62, 3% increase. So I'll just start at $78,000 at the age of 62, and then add 3% every year all the way out. And then really all you have to do is you say, well, I'm going to take my income, subtract my spend. How much do I need to take from my savings? So $54,000 a year. And suppose I started with $1 million in my investments, then subtract out the $54, $946,000 at the end of that year. Okay, now assume I'm getting a 7% return on investment, so the next year I'd be up to $1,012,000. After your spend, you'd have that much left, and so forth. So you just keep doing that year after year, copy the whole thing out, and then when you get all the way out to the end, what you can see as you go along, your nest egg at some point starts dropping. You'll still have money in your nest egg that you can draw from by the age of 85, but it's starting to decrease. And mainly because of inflation, the cost of our spend continuing to go up. So over those 25 years, you'd see, well, I get about $700,000 from Social Security. I get about 2.6 of spend, and then I'd spend over 1.9 million from my investments to make up the deficit. But in the end, basically, I'd end up with almost $500,000 left. But as you can see, the way the money's decreasing pretty rapidly, probably run out of money at some point. If I lived to 90, I'd probably run out of money. So this is just one way to do kind of a rough estimate. And you could plug in your own numbers, other sources of income. A lot of people have pensions, so you can add that in, or rental properties, or other things like that. So one thing it does show you, if you can have multiple sources of income, that's really good. One reason why you'd want to have pensions and things like that besides just regular Social Security. So you can see from my spreadsheet example, if I had about $1 million saved up at that level of spend and that level of Social Security income and that starting age, you can see I still have money left over in my investments if by the time I reached 85. So another approach that people take is they use the 4% rule. So the 4% rule basically says if I take 4% out of my savings every year and I live on that 4%, then I should be able to live on that money at least 25 years. And the study that we'll talk about in a little bit said basically there's a very high probability of being able to live off of that 30 to 33 years. So when you look at 4% though, if you're taking 4% of $1 million of savings, that's $40,000 a year. So could you live off of $40,000 a year? It'd be tough for a lot of families. If you're very frugal, you definitely could do it. And if you didn't have to pay much in income tax or medical expense, you could probably squeak it out. But a lot of people really talk about 1.5 to 2 million a year. So 4% of 2 million is $80,000 a year. And you kind of saw from my previous example that I could easily get by with $80,000 a year, at least to start with. What you see a lot of times in the financial world, they start saying you really need close to $2 million. This tends to be for people a little bit higher in the higher income brackets than people that are, like making $50,000 a year. There are some disputes about the 4% rule. It's kind of based on 25 years having stability. So what if you live longer? What if the market goes down? You have higher expenses, things like that. So you always got to add some extra room in there. And then what you'll see a little bit later is some people say really it needs to be the 3% rule to safely live off of that money at least 25 years. So the 4% rule was based on a study published in 1994 by William Bengen. So what he did is he ran some simulations of 30-year periods to see if a 4% withdrawal rate could be sustained for somebody 30 to 33 years. And he used an allocation of 50% stock, 50% bond. And what he did is he just basically took 30-year periods, ran some estimates okay, would I run out of money in that 30-year span? And then he would increment it the next up a year and do that 30-year span. He kept doing it over and over again. And he found out like 95% of the time, 4% will work based on the historical numbers. Now, there are some problems with the 4% rule. If you have a large purchase early in retirement that you withdraw a lot of money from your savings, that's going to make a big dent. And then when he was doing it, the interest rates and the bond rates were a little bit higher. Lately, we've been in a very low interest rate period, so the rate of return on bonds is pretty low compared to past years. And then the other thing you consider is you may live longer than 30 years when you stop working. You or your spouse may live to be 90 and 95, or if you retire really early, then the span of time that you're talking about is more than 30 years. There's been a lot of talk about this, and some people say it really should be the 3% rule or 3.5% rule. There's some videos that you could take a look at. I encourage you to look at them. There's a lot of videos on YouTube where people have talked about this, and you'll see the 3% rule, things like that. There was also other studies. One was the Trinity study, and they came out with kind of the same result as William Bengen. 3%, 4% is kind of the rough range of all of that. Recently on YouTube, in one of the podcasts, Afford Anything, they interviewed Suze Orman, and Suze was very critical of people trying to retire early. She says you need at least $5 million to retire, and maybe closer to $10 million. And you can find this podcast on YouTube by searching for it, and she goes in a lot of detail of why she thinks that. If you really listen to it, most of it is kind of a worst case scenario. You get really sick, you're in the hospital a long time, you have some really big expenditure, things like that. Things go bad. You got to support one of your relatives. So she was looking at it kind of worst case and talked about some cases where people didn't have enough saved. They thought they were okay, but they weren't. And a lot of it is on worst case scenarios. Now, right after that podcast came out, the Financial Samurai kind of reiterated what Suze Orman was saying, and you can go read his article on that. But what you see is that most financial advisors will say you need between $1 to $2 million, and with the preference being towards the higher end, generally $1.5 to $2 million. Let's suppose you do need $1.5 to $2 million. Do you think you'll be able to save that amount? Well, the only way you really can do it is you got to take advantage of compounding. Just maxing out your 401k probably isn't going to get you there. You got to really make sure you get at least 7% return on investment of what you do save over at least 30 years. So for the young people out there, the earlier you start, the better. People who start later in life in their 40s and 50s are really at a big disadvantage. It'd be really hard to get to $2 million. But if you start in your 20s, it shouldn't be too bad. A good chance of it. There have been some people that say, well, you really only need $500,000 saved. And there are websites and videos that you can watch where they make the argument around there. But that's kind of like the best case scenario and living very frugally. So you can go read the articles, but basically it's a tough thing to do. And most financial advisors really don't talk about having less than $500,000. Most of them will say you probably need really $1 million, especially if you're going to retire early. Now, there are a lot of websites out there that you can take a look at. Mr. Money Mustache is a famous person who now lives in Colorado that retired early at the age of 30. He never does say exactly how much he saved. It was probably a little less than $1 million by some estimates. Now, he's made a lot of money after retiring with his website and other things that he's done. So he hasn't really stopped working. He's just stopped his corporate job. There's also the Boggleheads forum, and you'll find a lot of people on there talking about retirement, how much you need, and there's various blogs. One website that I really like that is very useful is ESI Money, and they have this series of interviews on there where they interview so-called millionaires, which are basically just people who, through savings and investment, have earned $1 million or saved $1 million, and then they tell their story about their career, their spending, their investments. So hopefully this gives you some things to think about as you start calculating how much you need. You should definitely try some of the calculators online. You should figure out how much you're spending every year and then create your own little spreadsheet, and then watch some of the videos on the safe withdrawal rate, the 4% or 3.5% or 3%. Listen to Susie Ormond's podcast on YouTube. See what you think about that. Start reading some of those forums, some of those blogs. So hopefully this has helped you. If it has, click the subscribe button, click the like button, post your comments, questions. I'll take a look at them and help you if I can. So the other thing I'd like you to do, take a look at my website, and I'll be talking to you again soon.